What Joe said reminded me of the story in the book of Daniel, chapter 3 and chapter 6. In Daniel 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they get in this fiery furnace. In Daniel 6, he gets thrown into the lion's den. So the story goes like this. In Daniel 3, there's this giant statue that Nebuchadnezzar makes, all out of gold, because he's rebelling against the dream that God gives him. And so they're all supposed to bow down, but some of them won't. And that's these three Jewish boys. And so the king tries to give them another chance, but they really don't want to listen because they are going to serve their God, even if they have to die. Well, in Daniel 6, they don't like it that the king is thinking of promoting Daniel to be the top of the top. So they come up with this plot to get him thrown into the lion's den. And if they say to the king, look, make this decree, if anybody worships, bows down, prays to any other god except for you during these 30 days, if they pray to anybody else but you, throw them in the lion's den. And so it becomes a decree. And the Medes and the Persians, once they made a law, they couldn't change it. So these two stories, we find parallels, and we're going to compare these parallels now. So in Daniel 3, verse 16, it says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. This really makes me think of what Joe said. He got the prognosis a year to a year and a half, and he doesn't know exactly how it's going to pan out, but regardless, he knows that God is going to take care of him, whether it's now or later in the resurrection, and he's hopeful and he's looking forward to that, and God has given him peace. So regardless of the outcome, he's going to keep following God. Now in Daniel 6, verse 10, it says this, Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. So Daniel had the same perspective. Whether or not they throw me in the lion's den, regardless of the outcome, I'm going to keep following God, because he knew that God loved him and that God had called him and had a purpose and a plan for his life. Now in Daniel 3, verse 24, it says this, Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished. Remember, he throws these 3 guys into the fiery furnace, and he arose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, Did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said to the king, True, O king. Look, he answered, I see 4 men loose walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Who came into the midst of that fiery furnace and was with them and gave them peace in the middle of their trial? Yeah, it was Jesus himself before he became incarnate in the flesh. Now watch the parallel here in Daniel chapter 6, verse 19. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. Wow, look at that parallel. In the middle of his trial, God was with Daniel. God was with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He took care of them. He was with them. They had their peace. And I listened to Joe talking about being in the middle of his furnace, in his lion's den, and he has peace. Do you have that peace? We find that peace in Jesus. Jesus says, my peace I give to you. He says, I don't give it to you the way the world gives it to you. He tells us not to be worried, not to be troubled. He gives us an inner peace. It doesn't mean that our storm subsides. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden the fire dies down or that the trials just all of a sudden go away. It means that in the middle of our tempest, we are secure and we have that peace. There was a story of Jesus in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, and the disciples were in a boat, and all of a sudden this huge windstorm started up. Remember where Jesus was? If you read the story, he was in the boat asleep on a pillow. He wasn't worried, and the disciples were freaking out. They were trying to get the water out, and then finally they cried out to him when they realized their boat was sinking, or they thought it was going to sink. They asked him to save them, and Jesus stood up and he rebuked the wind and the waves, and he said, "Peace, be still." And all of a sudden, it all came to silence and calmness. You know what? If Jesus is in your boat, it doesn't matter how hard the wind blows. It doesn't matter how tall the waves are. Your ship will not sink, and you will go and get to the other side. Now, in Daniel 3, verse 22, it says this about the fiery furnace. "Therefore, because the king's command was urgent, and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." So they took these guys to throw them in the fire. They didn't get killed. Who got killed? The Babylonian soldiers who threw them in. Now watch this, the parallel in Daniel 6, verse 24. "And the king gave the command, and they brought those men who had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives." Because in the old days, it was you and it was everybody in your family, right? "And the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den." Man, that's crazy. You mean to tell me that there are times in my life when someone's trying to do me wrong, and the wrong they intended to do to me, it actually goes upon themselves and they are the one that suffers it? Yeah, unfortunately, there's something that goes like this. What goes around comes around. And sometimes the ill that someone intends to do to somebody else ends up being the ill that they themselves suffer. Another parallel, both kings are amazed at what God does, and they both make a decree regarding God's greatness. So Nebuchadnezzar makes one in Daniel 3, and Darius makes one in Daniel 6. So that tells me that when we go through trials, that other people notice. They don't just notice us, they notice the God we trust in. And in the middle of our darkness, they see light. In the middle of our tempest, they see the peace that we have, and it tells them something, not simply about us, but it tells them something about the God we serve who's in our life, that loves us and walks with us every step of the way. Jesus tells us, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." He says, "I will be with you always, even unto the end of the age." And he definitely doesn't leave me during my hard times. Now, sometimes people think, well, if I become a Christian, all my trials, everything will go away, and it'll just be the smooth, easy road. The Bible doesn't promise that. Remember, Jesus went to the cross and his disciples were killed. You know, John in the book of Revelation, they banished him to Patmos. And what they tell us is that they tried to boil him in oil and didn't work. And so they banished him to that island. So being a Christian doesn't mean that all of a sudden all my problems go away. It means that God will be with me in my fiery furnace. He will send his angel to give me that peace and comfort in my lion's den. Now, both chapters finish on this note, Daniel 3:30 and Daniel 6:28. Daniel and his friends prosper. The original Aramaic word, Shadrach, means to prosper. So Daniel prospers, his friends prosper. And like Joe said, he doesn't know if his prospering is going to be now or if it's going to be later. But what we do know is that those who put their trust in Jesus, Jesus is coming back for them, and he gives us the assurance of our salvation by granting us his Holy Spirit. And one of the fruit of the Spirit, the Bible says, is peace. When you have that overwhelming sense of peace that is evident in the middle of your storm, in the middle of your trial. Maybe you have a prognosis that you too only have a year or a year and a half left. In the middle of your storm, that peace is evidence that God is with you. Now, I had a car wreck, and as I was stuck in that car and a seat was pushed over in front of me, I had gashed my head, scalped me part of the way, and as I came to, I didn't know if I was gonna make it either. I saw, blood on my hand, the windshield was broken below by my feet, and I smelled fumes, and I didn't know if I was gonna make it out of the car or not. but I can tell you that I had an overwhelming sense of peace. And it's not because I did something, it's because God was with me and he granted me that peace in the middle of my storm. What is the storm you're going through? What is the fiery furnace that you've been thrown into? What is that lion's den that you find yourself in? God promises you peace, his supernatural, abundant peace that is beyond words. He gives it to you. Come, give your life to Jesus. Renew that relationship. If you've wandered away, he's calling you back. If you don't know what it means to follow Jesus, just tell him you want him in your life. Find someone that can help you understand Jesus. Get the Bible. Start reading the story of Jesus in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and find out all about this person that will be with you in your fiery furnace and have his presence give you a superabundance, a sense of peace in your lion's den.